They kicked me out after 10 years of building my husband's family business, and they honestly believed I would walk away with nothing but a cardboard box. They looked at me as though I had already been erased from the story we had spent a decade writing together. "Pack your things, Claire," my brother-in-law said, sliding an empty box across the polished conference table. "Your badge, your laptop, your keys. They belong to the company." My mother-in-law folded her hands with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "This company has always belonged to family." My husband never argued. He never reached for my hand. He only stared at the table as though silence could protect him from what was happening. I remember hearing the soft hum of the air conditioning louder than anyone's voice. I remember the weight of my employee badge resting in my palm. And I remember thinking that the hardest part was not losing my job. It was realizing that the people I loved had already decided I no longer belonged. Before we go any further, if this story truly resonates with you, I would love for you to press the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment only if this story speaks to your heart. Tell me where you are watching from, whether it is a city here in the United States or somewhere else in the world, and if you can, share your local time. I always enjoy knowing where these stories find people. My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 34 years old, born and raised in North Carolina, and until that Thursday afternoon in Charlotte, I believed loyalty could hold a family together. Looking back now, I know that was the day everything inside my marriage quietly broke, even though almost nobody in that boardroom noticed it. Whitmore Industrial Supply stood just outside uptown Charlotte, a 5-story brick building that my husband used to call our second home. We had celebrated birthdays there. We had spent Christmas Eve there more than once. I had watched the sunrise from that parking lot after nights when deadlines mattered more than sleep. Yet that afternoon, the lobby felt unfamiliar. The receptionist who had hugged me after my mother's funeral avoided my eyes. The security guard nodded politely but did not smile. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of details you only notice when the ground beneath your life begins to move. Richard Whitmore, my father-in-law, stood near the windows overlooking the warehouse. His gray suit was perfectly pressed. His posture was as straight as ever. He did not look angry. Somehow that hurt even more. "Claire," he said quietly, "we appreciate everything you have done." I almost laughed because those words always come before someone takes something away. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Let us not make this harder than it needs to be." Margaret adjusted the pearl bracelet on her wrist. "You have always been hard-working, dear, but you have to understand your place." I looked toward Ethan. We had been married for 11 years. We had survived layoffs, recessions, illnesses, and months when every dollar mattered. He used to squeeze my hand under conference tables whenever negotiations became difficult. This time he did not even look at me. "Ethan," I said softly, "are you really going to let this happen?" He swallowed before answering. "Claire, maybe it is best if everyone moves forward. Everyone. Not us. Not our marriage. Everyone." That single word settled over me heavier than any shout ever could. Daniel slid the cardboard box closer. "Human Resources already disabled your access. Your office has been packed except for personal items." I blinked. "You packed my office without telling me?" "Efficiency," he replied with a shrug. "No reason to drag things out." Margaret stood and walked toward me. Her perfume smelled faintly of white lilies. She lowered her voice just enough that everyone still heard every word. "You should be grateful, Claire. Many women would have never had the opportunities this family gave you." I felt my heart beat slow instead of racing. It was strange. "Pain sometimes arrives quietly. I earned every opportunity I ever had here," I answered. Richard sighed. "Please, let us leave emotions outside this room, outside that room." As if my life could be folded away like another business file, I reached for my badge first. The plastic edge was worn smooth after thousands of mornings opening the same security doors. Then my office key. Then the company phone. I placed each item carefully inside the box. Nobody spoke. The silence almost sounded respectful until I realized it was simply convenient. Daniel finally broke it. "Security will escort you downstairs." I smiled for the first time that day. "Do you think I am going to steal the building?" Nobody answered. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt longer than it ever had before. My office still smelled like coffee and printer paper. Family photographs had already been stacked neatly beside the computer monitor. Someone had emptied my desk drawers into another cardboard box without bothering to organize anything. Paper clips rested beside framed photographs. Legal pads lay beneath coffee mugs. 10 years reduced to random objects. I picked up the framed picture from our company picnic 5 summers earlier. Ethan stood beside me with his arm around my shoulders. Richard had been smiling. Daniel was laughing. Margaret was handing lemonade to warehouse workers. Looking at it now felt like staring at strangers wearing familiar faces. "Take your time," the security officer said gently from the doorway. "I am sorry." I nodded. "Thank you." He seemed embarrassed to be there. I could not blame him. He was only doing his job. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk to make sure nothing had been left behind. A plain manila envelope had slipped behind an old binder. There was no company logo, no handwritten note, only 4 faded words stamped across the front. "Original share documents." I frowned. I did not remember putting it there. Before I could open it, Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Anything important?" he asked. "Just old paperwork." His eyes landed on the envelope for less than a second before he looked away. "Throw it in the box. It is probably outdated." "Probably." I slipped it beneath a stack of notebooks without another word. Something about his voice felt different. Too quick, too casual. As I carried the box through the lobby for the last time, rain tapped softly against the glass entrance doors. Nobody stopped me. Nobody thanked me. Nobody said goodbye. I walked into the parking lot believing I had lost everything I had spent 10 years building. But as I placed the box on the passenger seat of my old SUV, my hand brushed against that forgotten envelope one more time, and for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly had the unmistakable feeling that someone had spent a very long time hoping I would never open it. The rain had grown heavier by the time I pulled out of the company parking lot. Charlotte traffic crawled beneath a gray afternoon sky, windshield wipers moving back and forth with a rhythm that almost sounded like someone quietly counting the years I had just left behind. The cardboard box sat on the passenger seat beside me, shifting every time I stopped at a red light. My employee badge rested on top of everything else, its blue lanyard tangled around an old coffee mug that one of the warehouse supervisors had given me after our busiest Christmas season. The words painted across the side had almost faded away. "We get it done." I smiled without realizing it. We used to say those words to each other whenever another impossible problem landed on our desks. Back when impossible still sounded exciting instead of exhausting. I reached my driveway just before sunset. The little white house Ethan and I had bought 8 years earlier looked exactly the same as it always had. The maple tree in the front yard still leaned slightly toward the porch. The porch light still switched on automatically as evening settled over the neighborhood. Nothing outside had changed. Only the people inside had. Ethan's truck was gone. A short text message waited on my phone. "I am staying at my parents' house tonight. We both need space." No apology, no explanation, just space. I placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter and carried the box into what used to be our home office. For years, that room had been filled with blueprints, supplier contracts, inventory charts, and coffee cups that never seemed to stay empty for very long. Now it felt strangely quiet. Dust floated through the last orange light coming in from the window. I knelt beside the box and began taking things out one at a time. A stapler, a notebook filled with handwritten production schedules, a framed photograph from our first warehouse expansion. My fingers stopped on that picture. Ethan looked so much younger then. We both did. His arm rested around my shoulders while we stood in front of an empty steel building that had barely enough lights to work through the night. "Can you believe this place is ours?" he had whispered after the photographer walked away. I laughed. "It belongs to your family." He shook his head immediately. "No, it belongs to everyone who is willing to fight for it." I had believed him. Back then, believing Ethan came as naturally as breathing. I placed the photograph on my desk and opened another notebook. A grocery receipt slipped out and fluttered onto the floor. 3 frozen pizzas, 2 bags of coffee, energy drinks, dated nearly 10 years earlier. I remembered that week instantly. We had stayed inside the warehouse for almost 70 hours because one of our largest clients had threatened to cancel a contract that would have put the company under. Richard had slept for a few hours in his office. Daniel had gone home every night. Ethan and I stayed. "You should get some sleep," Ethan had told me around 3 in the morning, while I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor surrounded by shipping manifests. After we finished these orders, I answered. He smiled. You always say that. Because it is always true. He kissed my forehead before carrying another stack of boxes toward the loading dock. Those memories arrived without asking permission. Every object inside that cardboard box carried another piece of the life I thought we had built together. A cracked tape measure reminded me of the first distribution center we renovated ourselves. An old employee appreciation pin reminded me of the barbecue we organized after surviving the recession. Richard had stood on the loading dock holding a paper plate with barbecue ribs and baked beans. He raised a plastic cup toward the staff. This company is still standing because people like Claire refuse to quit. Everyone applauded. Margaret smiled politely beside him. Later that evening, while we were cleaning folding tables after everyone had gone home, she quietly handed me a trash bag. You are wonderful with these events, she said. Women notice the little things men overlook. I remember staring at her for a second before tying another garbage bag shut. She had watched me negotiate with banks that morning. She had watched me solve a supply chain disaster before lunch. Yet the only compliment she offered was about folding chairs and potato salad. It should have bothered me more than it did. Maybe it did. Maybe I simply learned to hide it. There had been other moments, small enough to ignore one at a time, large enough to change a marriage when collected over years. At family dinners, Richard asked Daniel about expansion plans. He asked Ethan about future leadership. Then he turned toward me with the same question almost every holiday. Claire, how is everyone enjoying your cooking? Everyone laughed because it sounded harmless. I laughed too because wives were expected to laugh at things like that. On our 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan promised we would finally take a vacation. We booked a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. 2 days before leaving, Daniel called. There is a vendor issue in Atlanta, he said. We need all hands. Ethan looked at me apologetically. Next year? I unpacked our suitcases without saying a word. There was always a next year. Until suddenly there was not. My eyes drifted back toward the manila envelope lying beneath the notebooks. I still had not opened it. Somehow it felt heavier than everything else inside the box. I reached for it, then stopped when something slipped from between 2 legal pads and landed softly against the hardwood floor. It was a small, folded note written on yellow paper. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting belonged to Richard. I recognized the bold letters immediately. Claire, thank you for believing in this company when almost nobody else did. We will never forget what you have done for this family. There was no date, no signature beyond his first name. I read those words 3 times before setting the paper beside the photograph. We will never forget, yet somehow everyone had. Or perhaps they wanted me to believe they had. My gaze slowly returned to the unopened envelope. For the first time that evening, I noticed something I had completely missed in the office. Across the upper right corner, beneath years of faded dust, someone had stamped one additional line in dark blue ink. Confidential. Do not destroy. I felt a chill move slowly through the room because suddenly I could not stop asking myself one question. If those papers truly meant nothing, then why had someone gone to so much trouble to make sure they were never thrown away? I left the envelope exactly where it was and made myself a cup of coffee I never drank. The kitchen had become unnaturally quiet. For more than a decade, evenings usually ended with Ethan walking through the front door carrying another problem from the company. We would spread invoices across the dining room table, argue over shipping costs, laugh at impossible deadlines, and somehow convince ourselves that sacrificing another weekend was simply what building a future looked like. That night, only the refrigerator hummed. I sat there staring at the unopened envelope until my phone vibrated against the countertop. Ethan. For a brief second, I thought he had come to his senses. Instead, his voice sounded distant, almost rehearsed. Claire, there is something we need to take care of. I thought everything had already been taken care of this afternoon. There was a long pause. Mother wants the rest of the company property returned. I already gave them everything. Not everything. I frowned. What are you talking about? Daniel said there might still be documents at the house. Old files, meeting notes, contracts. Anything related to Whitmore Industrial Supply belongs to the company. I looked across the room toward the cardboard box. You packed my office yourselves. Just look around. If you find anything, bring it back tomorrow. Tomorrow? Yes. Another silence. Then he added quietly, "It will make everything easier." Easier for whom, I wanted to ask. Instead, I simply answered, "I will see what is here." He thanked me almost automatically before ending the call. Not once did he ask how I was doing. Not once did he ask whether I had eaten dinner. I carried my coffee into the office and looked at the envelope again. Old documents. Daniel had mentioned paperwork in my office. Now Ethan was calling specifically about paperwork left in the house. The coincidence settled somewhere uncomfortable in the back of my mind. I still did not open it. Instead, I began sorting through the remaining files one stack at a time. Most of them were exactly what I expected. Vendor agreements, warehouse expansion budgets, insurance renewals, employee appreciation plans. Every folder seemed to contain another reminder that I had poured years of my life into helping a business that no longer wanted my name attached to it. Around 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Olivia standing on the porch with her hands buried inside the pockets of a gray sweatshirt. She looked exhausted. I opened the door before she had a chance to knock again. "I hope I am not interrupting," she said softly. "You are not." She stepped inside, glancing around as though she had entered a stranger's house instead of the place where she had celebrated every Thanksgiving for the last 8 years. "I brought soup," she said, holding up a paper bag from a neighborhood cafe. "You always forget to eat when you are stressed." I almost smiled. Some things never change. We sat together in the kitchen. Steam rose from the containers between us. Neither of us touched the food right away. Finally, she spoke. "Today should not have happened like that." "But it did." She nodded. "Mother has been talking about replacing you for months." I looked up. "Months?" She kept saying fate now. "A leadership should stay inside the bloodline." The words landed gently, but they stayed. Did Ethan know? Olivia lowered her eyes to the table. "I think he knew they were planning something that could—" "I do not think he realized how cruel it would become." I let that answer settle. It hurt because it sounded believable. Ethan had always avoided conflict. Silence had become his safest place, long before it became my greatest disappointment. Olivia finally noticed the cardboard box sitting in the doorway. "Have you started unpacking?" Slowly. She stood and walked toward it. "Can I help?" "Of course." We carried folders onto the desk together. She picked up the manila envelope without opening it. "This looks old." It was in my desk. She turned it over once, studying the faded paper. "Daniel asked about something like this tonight." I froze. What exactly did he say? Olivia hesitated. "He asked Father whether every original document had been collected." "Original?" That was the word he used. She looked confused. Father answered that nothing important should have been left behind. My heartbeat slowed. Did anyone explain what they meant? No. She placed the envelope back where she found it. Mother changed the subject. We finished organizing the rest of the files in silence. Before leaving, Olivia hugged me tightly. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you deserved better than today." After she drove away, I locked the front door and returned to the office one last time. The house felt colder now. I finally reached for the envelope, determined to open it before fear convinced me otherwise. But as I slid one finger beneath the sealed flap, something caught my attention. Along the back edge was a strip of yellowing tape that had partially peeled away with age. Underneath it, almost completely hidden, was another line of typed text that had never been visible from the front. It was not a company filing number, it was not a project code, it was a date. The same date Whitmore Industrial Supply had officially incorporated more than 10 years earlier. And in that instant, I realized Daniel had not been trying to recover ordinary paperwork. Without knowing it, he had spent the entire evening searching for the one envelope that might explain why everyone in that family had suddenly become so desperate. I did not sleep much that night. The envelope remained on my desk, untouched, while the questions inside my head grew louder with every passing hour. Just before sunrise, I made another pot of coffee and stood by the kitchen window watching a delivery truck roll slowly through the neighborhood. Ordinary mornings have a strange way of pretending nothing has changed. The mail still arrives. Dogs still bark. Children still wait for school buses. Yet somewhere beneath all that routine, an entire life can already be coming apart. Around 8:30, my phone rang again. This time it was not Ethan. The number belonged to Martin Ellis, the attorney who had handled the purchase of our house years earlier. I had not spoken to him in almost 6 years. Claire? His voice sounded older but immediately familiar. Good morning, Martin. I hope I am not calling at a bad time. I looked around the quiet kitchen. There has been better timing. He hesitated before continuing. I received an unusual request this morning. Someone from Whitmore Industrial Supply asked whether I still retained archived corporate records connected to your name. I felt my grip tighten around the coffee mug. Did they tell you why? No. Which is exactly why I called you instead of answering them. I walked slowly back toward the office. Would you have those records? Possibly. I would need to check storage. Another pause. Claire, if this concerns your employment, I would rather speak in person. We agreed to meet that afternoon at his office in downtown Charlotte. The drive into the city felt strangely familiar. I had driven those same streets thousands of times for supplier meetings, bank appointments, and contract negotiations. Today I drove as someone who no longer belonged to any of those places. Martin's office occupied the second floor of a restored brick building overlooking Tryon Street. The lobby still smelled faintly of polished oak and old books. When I stepped through the glass doors, the receptionist looked up from her desk. Before I had the chance to introduce myself, an older gentleman emerged from the hallway carrying a stack of files. His silver hair was neatly combed back. His posture remained perfectly straight despite his age. The moment he saw me, his expression softened. Miss Whitmore. He immediately shifted the files into one arm and extended his hand. It has been far too long. His voice carried genuine warmth, the kind that cannot be rehearsed. I smiled politely. Good to see you again, Martin. The receptionist glanced back and forth between us with obvious curiosity. Martin turned toward her. Please move my afternoon appointments if necessary. Mrs. Whitmore has priority. Of course, sir. He opened the office door himself instead of asking an assistant to do it. After you. It was such a small gesture. Yet after everything that had happened the previous day, simple respect felt almost unfamiliar. His office had hardly changed over the years. Dark walnut shelves lined one wall. Framed photographs of courthouse ceremonies hung beside old legal certificates. He motioned toward the leather chair across from his desk. Coffee? Thank you. He poured 2 cups himself. Neither of us spoke until we were seated. Finally, he folded his hands. First, I heard what happened yesterday. I nodded quietly. I am sorry. So am I. Martin studied my face for a long moment. You always deserved better than that family gave you. Before I could answer, someone knocked lightly on the open office door. A younger associate stepped inside carrying a folder. Mr. Ellis, I found the archive request. He stopped speaking the instant he noticed me. Mrs. Whitmore. His tone changed immediately. It is an honor to meet you again. I blinked. We have met before? Only briefly. During the East Distribution financing years ago. You probably do not remember. Everyone else left before midnight. You stayed until every employee's payroll issue had been solved. He smiled. People still talk about that night. I did not know what to say. Martin accepted the folder from him. Thank you, David. As the young attorney left, I caught him quietly closing the door behind him with unusual care. Martin looked down at the file but did not open it immediately. Claire, there is something I need to ask before we go any further. All right. Has anyone instructed you to surrender any personal files? I thought about Ethan's phone call, Daniel's questions, Olivia's uneasy expression. Yes. Martin nodded very slowly, as though my answer confirmed something he had already suspected. Before he could continue, my phone buzzed against the desk. Daniel. I let it ring once before answering. What is it? His voice came fast this time. No greeting. No pretense of politeness. Have you found any old corporate documents? Why? Because they belong to the company. I looked across the desk at Martin. He remained perfectly still, listening without interrupting. I have not decided what belongs to whom yet, I answered calmly. Daniel laughed once. It was a dry, impatient sound. Claire, do not make this difficult. Those papers are worthless anyway. Worthless. Martin slowly lifted his eyes from the folder and met mine. Something unreadable passed across his face. He had heard every word. After I ended the call, silence settled over the room. Martin finally opened the old archive folder. He did not show me the documents inside. He simply removed his reading glasses, looked directly at me, and spoke with a level of respect that made the room suddenly feel different. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "I think there are people asking you to hand over papers they clearly do not understand." At that exact moment, for the very first time, I realized I was no longer the only person in the room who believed the Whitmore family had made a mistake far bigger than they could possibly imagine. Martin did not speak again until he carefully closed the archive folder and rested both hands on top of it. The room felt smaller than it had only a few minutes earlier. Outside his office window, people crossed Tryon Street, carrying coffee cups and briefcases, completely unaware that a quiet conversation inside an old brick building had begun changing the direction of my life. "Claire," he said, his voice measured, "before I answer any questions, I need to ask one of my own." I nodded. "Did you ever sign anything after the company was incorporated that transferred ownership interests, stock certificates, or founder compensation back to the Whitmore family?" I searched my memory. I pictured conference rooms, legal pads, bank closings, refinancing documents, insurance renewals, expansion loans. There had been thousands of signatures over 10 years. I signed employment agreements, lending documents, vendor contracts, personal guarantees during the recession. But I do not remember signing anything that transferred ownership. Martin leaned back slowly. "That is exactly why I wanted to speak with you before anyone else did." He slid one yellow document halfway across the desk, careful not to reveal everything printed on the page. I noticed my own signature near the bottom. Above it were several familiar names, including Richard Whitmore's. "Do you remember this meeting?" he asked. I closed my eyes for a moment. The image returned almost immediately. We had gathered in the original conference room, back when the company still occupied a converted warehouse outside Charlotte. Rain had pounded against the metal roof while creditors waited for answers. Richard had looked exhausted. Ethan had barely slept for days. "We are asking everyone to sacrifice," Richard had said that afternoon. "Banks need confidence. Suppliers need confidence. We all have to believe this company has a future." I remembered sliding my savings across the table. Money my late father had left me after his passing. "Use it for payroll," I had said. Richard looked at me for a long time before answering. "Claire, I will never forget this." The memory faded as quickly as it had appeared. Martin watched my expression carefully. "You remember the meeting?" "Yes. Do you remember Richard insisting that your contribution could not simply be treated as another loan?" I frowned. Not clearly. Most people would not after 10 years. He tapped the folder gently. "That day created obligations that were documented very carefully." Before I could ask another question, his office phone rang. His assistant's voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Ellis, someone from Whitmore Industrial Supply is here asking whether you are available." Martin's eyes met mine immediately. "Who?" "Daniel Whitmore." Neither of us spoke for a second. Martin calmly pressed the intercom button. "Please let Mr. Whitmore know I am in a confidential meeting and unavailable. He says it concerns company records." Martin answered without hesitation. My response remains the same. The line disconnected. I felt my heartbeat quicken. "He came here?" Martin nodded. "Apparently." A faint smile crossed his face. "That tells me more than he intended." We remained silent until footsteps echoed down the hallway outside. Through the frosted glass, I could see the shadow of someone pacing back and forth before finally walking away. Martin waited another minute before standing. "Come with me." He led me through a narrow records room lined with shelves full of old archive boxes. Each one carried handwritten labels dating back decades. At the very end of the room stood a gray filing cabinet with a brass lock. He unlocked the top drawer and removed a weathered binder. "Not many people know these still exist," he said quietly. When companies were much smaller, attorneys often kept duplicate organizational records in secure storage. He did not hand me the binder. Instead, he opened it just enough for me to glimpse several familiar names typed across aging paper. Richard Whitmore, Ethan Whitmore, Claire Whitmore. Then he closed it again. "You deserve to understand your own history," he said, "but we are going to do this carefully." "Why carefully?" I asked. Martin gave a tired smile. "Because once certain facts become known, they cannot be put back where they came from." We returned to his office just as my phone buzzed again. This time it was Ethan. I answered after the second ring. "Claire." His voice sounded strained. "Have you been talking to lawyers?" I looked across at Martin. who quietly pretended to organize papers. Why would you ask that? Ethan hesitated. Daniel said someone saw your car downtown. Charlotte is a large city. Please, just tell me. I could hear genuine worry beneath his words for the first time in days. Not concern for me. Concern about something else. I met someone who treated me with respect, I replied. It has been a while. Silence filled the line. Finally, Ethan whispered, Claire, if you found old paperwork, maybe you should let us review it before anyone else does. I closed my eyes briefly. Why? His answer came too quickly. Because some old documents can be misunderstood. Understood. Not misplaced. Not outdated. Misunderstood. Goodbye, Ethan. I ended the call before he could continue. Martin had heard enough to understand the conversation without asking for details. He slowly removed his glasses and folded them neatly beside the archive folder. Interesting, he murmured. What? People who know a document has no value rarely rush to recover it. Late that afternoon, I walked back toward my car carrying nothing except the unopened envelope and a business card Martin insisted I keep. Across the street, I noticed Daniel standing beside a black company SUV, pretending to scroll through his phone. The moment he looked up, his eyes locked onto the envelope tucked beneath my arm. His confident expression disappeared for just an instant. He did not wave. He did not smile. He simply watched me, as though he had suddenly realized I might be carrying something far more important than either of us had been willing to admit. And for the very first time since they forced me out of the company, I saw uncertainty in the eyes of the man who had always believed he knew exactly who I was. Daniel remained across the street until I pulled away from the curb. He never approached my car. He never called out my name. He simply stood beside the black company sport utility vehicle with one hand in his pocket, watching the manila envelope disappear behind my windshield. For years I had known him as someone who always looked certain of himself. He made decisions quickly. He spoke as though every room already belonged to him. What I saw that afternoon was different. It lasted only a second, but it was there. Doubt. I drove home without turning on the radio. Charlotte's skyline slowly disappeared in my rearview mirror, while Martin's words repeated quietly in my mind. People who know a document has no value rarely rush to recover it. I placed the envelope back on my desk beside the old handwritten note from Richard. The two pieces of paper seemed strangely connected, although I still could not explain why. One promised I would never be forgotten. The other appeared to contain something that everyone suddenly wanted. Before I could gather my thoughts, my phone vibrated again. This time it was Olivia. "Claire," she said without greeting. "Are you home?" "Yes. Do not be alarmed, but Father has called an emergency executive meeting tonight." I frowned. Why would he do that? Nobody knows. Daniel has been making phone calls all afternoon. Mother keeps saying there is a misunderstanding that has to be fixed before the investors arrive next week. Investors. That single word lingered in the air. It was the first time anyone outside the family had been mentioned since I was forced out of the company. "Did they say what the misunderstanding is?" I asked. "No, but everyone seems nervous." After we ended the call, I walked into the backyard, carrying my coffee. The sun was beginning to disappear behind the trees, leaving long shadows across the grass. I remembered standing in that same yard years earlier, when Ethan told me the company had finally become profitable again. He had wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "We made it." I believed he meant we had survived together. Now I wondered whether we had simply been walking toward different destinations without realizing it. The following morning, Martin called before 9 o'clock. "Claire, I would like you to come back to the office." "Did you find something?" "I found someone." An hour later, I was sitting across from him again. Another chair had been placed beside his desk. An elderly woman with neatly pinned silver hair stood when I entered the room. She wore a navy blazer and held a leather notebook against her chest. Martin smiled gently. "Claire, I would like you to meet Linda Foster." The name sounded familiar, although I could not immediately place it. The woman stepped toward me and extended both hands. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said warmly. "I have been hoping I would see you again one day." I shook her hand. "Have we met?" She smiled. "Many years ago. You were far too busy saving a company to remember everyone around you." There was no exaggeration in her voice, only quiet certainty. Martin waited until we were seated before speaking. Linda served as corporate secretary during the company's earliest years. The memory returned almost instantly. A small office near the original conference room, boxes filled with legal files. A woman who always carried color-coded folders and somehow remembered every board meeting without looking at her notes. "I remember now," I said softly. Linda nodded. "Not many people remember the secretary. I always tried." Her smile widened. "Yes, you did." She opened her notebook and carefully removed a photocopy of an old meeting agenda. The paper had yellowed around the edges. "Do you remember the emergency board meeting after First Carolina Bank refused to extend another line of credit?" I closed my eyes for a moment. "Barely. Richard believed the company might close within weeks." She paused. "You believed it could still survive." My chest tightened. "We all believed." Linda gently shook her head. "No, Claire, not everyone." She looked down at the paper before continuing. "Some people wanted to walk away. Some wanted bankruptcy protection. Some wanted to sell whatever remained." Martin remained silent, allowing her words to settle naturally. "You were one of the very few people arguing that the business still deserved another chance." I stared quietly at the table. I had never thought of those days as anything extraordinary. They had simply felt necessary. Linda smiled sadly. "You always stayed after the meetings ended. Someone had to finish the work." "Exactly." She looked directly into my eyes. "That is why certain decisions were made." Before I could ask what she meant, the conference room phone rang. Martin answered after the first ring. "Ellis Law Office." He listened without speaking. His expression slowly changed. "Yes," he replied calmly. "I understand." After ending the call, he looked first at Linda, then at me. "Whitmore Industrial Supply's outside counsel has requested copies of every archived corporate record mentioning Claire Whitmore." Linda slowly folded her hands. "That is sooner than I expected." I felt my heartbeat quicken. "Can they demand that?" Martin answered carefully. "They can request many things. Will you give them what they asked for?" "Not without determining who is legally entitled to receive it." The room fell silent again. Nobody celebrated, nobody smiled. There was only the quiet realization that something had already begun shifting. Someone knocked gently on the office door. David, the younger attorney from the previous day, stepped inside carrying a sealed courier envelope. "This just arrived from Wilmington," he said. Marked urgent. Martin accepted it, glanced at the sender, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw genuine surprise cross his face. He looked at Linda. Then he looked back at me. Without opening the envelope, he quietly said, "I believe we have just received the first independent confirmation that the truth may no longer belong to the Whitmore family alone." Martin did not open the courier envelope immediately. Instead, he rested it carefully on the conference table as though whatever lay inside deserved patience more than urgency. Linda watched him without speaking. David quietly closed the office door behind him. Nobody in the room seemed eager to rush toward an answer. I realized then that truth often arrives much more quietly than fear does. Martin finally broke the seal and unfolded several official documents. He read them silently, his eyes moving slowly across each page before setting them neatly into a single stack. He looked at me with the same calm expression he had carried throughout our meeting, but something behind his eyes had changed. "Claire," he said, "I think we should avoid making assumptions until every record has been reviewed." I nodded. "That sounds reasonable." Linda smiled faintly. "It always did." Martin looked toward David. "Please contact Wilmington and confirm the chain of custody on these records." Immediately. David left without another question. No celebration, no dramatic announcement. Just careful steps, exactly as they should be. My phone vibrated before the office became quiet again. "Ethan." I hesitated before answering. "Hello." His voice sounded strained, more tired than angry. "Can we meet?" I looked through the window at people walking below. "Why now?" "Because everything is getting out of control." "What changed?" There was a long silence before he finally admitted, "People are asking questions I cannot answer." We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop a few blocks away. It was the same place where we had once celebrated signing our very first distribution contract. The owner still recognized us, although this time she simply offered a sympathetic smile before leaving 2 mugs on the table. Ethan looked older than he had only a week earlier. His tie hung loosely around his collar. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. He wrapped both hands around his coffee without drinking it. "Daniel thinks you are working against us," I answered quietly. "I have not contacted your investors. I have not spoken to your employees. I have not called your clients." "I know. Then who is causing the problem?" He looked away. "People inside the company." I waited. Ethan finally sighed. "The board wants answers about certain historical records." "Because of me? Because no one can explain why everyone suddenly became so interested in documents they ignored for years." He rubbed his forehead. "Father says there must be some filing mistake." "Do you believe that?" He did not answer immediately. I do not know what to believe anymore. That was the first honest thing he had said to me in a long time. I felt no satisfaction hearing it, only sadness. "Claire," he continued softly, "if there is something you know." I gently interrupted him. "Then the right place for that truth is wherever the records already exist." He looked at me for a long moment. "You are different." "No," I replied. I finally stopped trying to convince everyone else who I was. He lowered his eyes again. Before either of us spoke another word, the bell above the cafe door chimed. Daniel walked inside. He froze the moment he saw us sitting together. His expression hardened immediately. "So this is where you have been," Ethan stood. "Daniel, not now." "No," Daniel snapped. "Now is exactly the right time." Several customers glanced toward us before returning to their conversations. I remained seated. Daniel looked directly at me. "Whatever game you are playing, it ends today." I answered calmly. "I am having coffee. Do not insult my intelligence." Ethan stepped between us. "Enough." Daniel ignored him completely. "Investors are demanding explanations. Outside counsel wants additional documentation. Father is furious." He leaned closer. "What have you done?" "Nothing," I said truthfully. "Then why is everyone suddenly asking about old records?" I met his eyes without raising my voice. Perhaps because they finally realized old records do not stop existing just because people stop talking about them. Daniel laughed once, but there was no confidence behind it anymore. "You always enjoyed sounding clever." Ethan quietly said, "Daniel, please." Daniel turned toward his brother. "Whose side are you on?" The question lingered between them longer than either expected. Ethan did not answer. Daniel noticed the silence immediately. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "First the lawyers, now you." Without another word, he walked out of the cafe, pushing the door harder than necessary. Ethan remained standing, staring through the window as his brother climbed into the company vehicle and drove away. "He thinks someone betrayed him," Ethan whispered. I looked at the untouched coffee cooling between us. Sometimes people mistake consequences for betrayal. Ethan slowly sat back down. For the first time since everything began, he looked frightened instead of defensive. "The board argued for nearly 3 hours this morning," he admitted. "Father blamed legal. Legal blamed finance. Finance blamed corporate records. Nobody agrees on who was responsible. And Daniel? He says someone intentionally hid information." I looked out toward the busy Charlotte sidewalk. People continued crossing the street beneath the afternoon sun, completely unaware that years of certainty were quietly unraveling inside one family. My phone vibrated once more. This time it was Olivia. I answered immediately. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Claire, Father and Daniel just had the worst argument I have ever seen. Is everyone all right?" No one was hurt. She paused. But Father asked one question that nobody in the room could answer. "What question?" Olivia took a slow breath. He looked at everyone around the table and said, "If none of us created this problem, then who has been telling us the wrong story for the last 10 years?" I ended the call and quietly slipped the phone back into my purse. Across the table, Ethan studied my face as though searching for answers I still had not spoken aloud. Yet before either of us could say another word, we both realized the same thing at exactly the same moment. The Whitmore family was no longer fighting me. They had begun fighting each other, and for the first time, no one seemed capable of stopping what came next. After I left the coffee shop, I did not drive home immediately. Instead, I found myself at Freedom Park, where Ethan and I had once spent quiet Sunday mornings before Whitmore Industrial Supply consumed every hour of our lives. The walking trails looked exactly as they always had. Parents pushed strollers beneath tall oak trees. An elderly couple fed ducks near the pond. 2 little girls chased each other across the grass, laughing without caring who was winning. I sat on an empty bench and listened to sounds that had nothing to do with board meetings, legal files, or family arguments. For the first time in days, my breathing slowed. I realized something I had been unable to admit while I was still inside the company. I was tired. Not tired from losing a job, tired from spending years trying to earn a place that had never truly been offered. My phone remained silent for almost an hour. The silence itself felt like a gift. Eventually, Martin called. "Claire, I wanted you to hear this from me, rather than through rumors." "What happened?" "Nothing dramatic. Which is exactly why it matters." I smiled faintly. "Go on." "The board postponed next week's investor meeting. Because of the records?" "Because they want certainty before making decisions." He paused. Truth has a way of slowing people down. After we ended the call, I watched the sunlight move across the water. There had been a time when any delay inside the company would have sent me into panic. I would have opened my laptop, called suppliers, rearranged schedules, and stayed awake until every problem had a solution. This time, I simply sat there. The company would make its own choices now. Whether wisely or poorly was no longer mine to control. That evening, Olivia stopped by the house carrying 2 paper bags from the same neighborhood cafe she always chose. "I guessed you forgot dinner again," she said with a tired smile. "You know me too well." We ate on the back porch while the sky slowly turned orange. Neither of us mentioned lawyers or documents at first. Instead, we talked about ordinary things. Her new garden, the neighbor's golden retriever who kept escaping the fence, the bakery downtown that had finally reopened after renovations. It reminded me how comforting ordinary conversations could be after days filled with conflict. Eventually, Olivia set down her cup. "Mother has barely spoken all day." I remained quiet. She keeps saying none of this was supposed to happen. Perhaps she believed everything would stay simple. Olivia looked toward the trees beyond the yard. "I think everyone believed that." She turned back to me. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you angry?" I considered the question carefully before answering. I was, and now? I looked at my hands resting around the warm coffee cup. Now I think I spent too many years measuring my value by whether one family accepted me. Olivia nodded slowly, as though she understood more than she expected. "You always felt like my sister," she whispered. I never said that enough. I reached across the small table and squeezed her hand. "You are saying it now." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she smiled anyway. "I hope it is not too late. Kindness rarely arrives too late." She stayed another hour before driving home. After she left, I walked through the house, turning off lights one room at a time. Every room held memories, some painful, some beautiful. I realized I did not need to erase any of them. They were simply chapters, not the whole story. The following morning, I opened the closet in the spare bedroom where I had stored several boxes after cleaning out my office years earlier. I was not searching for evidence anymore. I was searching for myself. Inside one box, I found photographs from company picnics, handwritten thank you notes from warehouse employees, Christmas cards signed by families whose names I still remembered, and a child's drawing that one employee's daughter had given me after I organized a fundraiser for her medical treatment. Across the bottom, she had written in uneven crayons, "Thank you for helping my daddy keep his job." I sat on the floor holding that drawing longer than any legal document I had seen all week. It reminded me that the work I had done had never been about titles or recognition. It had always been about people. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ethan. I almost let it go to voicemail before answering. His voice sounded softer than I had ever heard it. "Claire, I found something today." I waited. It was one of the old employee newsletters you used to write. He gave a quiet laugh that quickly disappeared. "Everyone kept thanking me for changes you made." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he whispered, "I do not think I understood how much of this company carried your fingerprints." I closed my eyes. "You do not have to understand it today. Will you ever forgive me?" The question hung gently between us. "Forgiveness is not the same as going back," I answered. "I know." His voice broke slightly. "I think I finally understand that." After we ended the call, I stood by the living room window watching leaves drift across the yard in the afternoon breeze. I no longer felt the need to chase every answer. Some truths would arrive in their own time. Some apologies would never come. Some relationships could be honored for what they had once been, without pretending they could become the same again. I carried the old employee drawing into my office and placed it beside the unopened envelope. One reminded me of the work I had done. The other reminded me that there was still something I did not yet fully understand. As the late afternoon light settled across the desk, I realized the greatest thing I had recovered was not hidden inside a forgotten file. It was the quiet certainty that my life no longer depended on the approval of people who had forgotten how to see me. And somehow, that realization made me believe that whatever waited inside the final chapter of this story would no longer be about what I had lost, but about what I was finally ready to become. 3 weeks later, I returned to Martin's office one last time. The autumn air carried the first hint of cooler weather through downtown Charlotte, and the maple trees lining the sidewalks had already begun changing color. So much had shifted in such a short time, yet the city itself seemed determined to remind me that life always continues, whether our hearts are ready or not. Martin greeted me with the same quiet respect he had shown from the beginning. Linda was already there, her notebook resting beside a folder that had become strangely familiar over the past weeks. Martin smiled gently before speaking. "Everything has now been independently reviewed." I nodded without saying a word. I had stopped chasing answers days earlier. Somehow, that made hearing them much easier. The archived corporate records, the incorporation documents, and the independent records maintained outside the company all agree, Martin said carefully. The original ownership records were never lawfully extinguished or replaced through the process everyone assumed had occurred. He paused, choosing each word with the precision that had always defined him. That is why every recent review kept leading back to the same conclusion. I looked down at the old manila envelope resting on the table between us. It had never been magic. It had never been hidden treasure. It had simply been the truth, patiently waiting for someone willing to read it carefully. I let out a slow breath. I never wanted any of this. "I know," Martin replied. "That is probably why you handled it better than most people would have." Linda reached across the table and lightly touched my hand. "Some people spend their lives trying to prove their worth. You spent yours creating it." Those words stayed with me far longer than anything written inside the legal files. During the following days, the consequences unfolded quietly. The proposed transaction involving Whitmore Industrial Supply was postponed, while every historical corporate record underwent independent review. Outside advisors requested additional governance procedures. The board voted to restructure several internal responsibilities. Nobody marched out in disgrace. Nobody was publicly humiliated. There was no dramatic collapse. Instead, confidence had to be rebuilt one careful decision at a time. Richard called me himself. It was the first time we had spoken without lawyers, meetings, or family expectations standing between us. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "Claire, good afternoon, Richard." He remained silent for several seconds before speaking again. I have replayed that meeting in my mind every day. I listened quietly. "I failed you," he admitted. "Not because of documents, because I stopped seeing the person sitting in front of me. I closed my eyes." Those words carried more weight than any apology I had imagined. "I appreciate you saying that," I answered. "I do not expect forgiveness. Forgiveness and trust are different things." "I know." Another long silence settled between us. "You helped build something important," he continued. "I forgot that businesses are built by people before they are built by families." When the call ended, I felt sadness, but not anger. Sometimes healing begins the moment someone finally tells the truth, even if it arrives years too late. Ethan came by the house one Sunday afternoon carrying a small cardboard box, the same size as the one Daniel had pushed toward me on the day they forced me out. We sat together on the front porch where we had once planned vacations we never took. He placed the box beside my chair. "These were still in my office," he said softly. Inside were photographs, handwritten notes from employees, an old Christmas ornament from the company's first holiday party, and the ceramic coffee mug with the faded words, "We get it done." Ethan looked toward the quiet street before speaking again. "I spent years believing loyalty meant keeping everyone else happy." He shook his head slowly. "I never realized loyalty without courage eventually becomes silence." I looked at him for a long moment. "I truly hope you find peace, Ethan." He nodded, tears filling his eyes without falling. "I hope you do too." We hugged goodbye. Not as husband and wife trying to repair what had already ended, simply as two people finally honest enough to stop pretending. Olivia visited often after that. Our friendship survived because it had never been built on ownership or obligation. She helped me organize the boxes from my office, and together we laughed over old photographs and forgotten company newsletters. One afternoon, she looked around the room and smiled. "You know something?" "What?" "This house finally feels like yours." I smiled back. "I think it finally feels like mine, too." Months later, I accepted a position advising several small family-owned businesses across North Carolina. I chose companies that valued people as much as profit. Young founders sometimes asked me what the secret to building a successful business was. They usually expected me to talk about strategy or finance. Instead, I always answered the same way. Never make someone prove they belong after they have already spent years helping you build the place. Every time I said those words, I remembered exactly why they mattered. The old manila envelope now rests inside a simple wooden drawer in my office. Beside it sits the child's crayon drawing thanking me for helping her father keep his job. If a fire ever forced me to save only one of those items, I already know which one I would choose. The drawing reminds me of the person I became. The documents only remind me of what was already true. If you have stayed with me until this final chapter, I want to leave you with something I wish someone had told me years ago. If you are constantly trying to earn respect from people determined not to give it, you are fighting the wrong battle. Protect your kindness, but protect your dignity too. Your value is not decided by the loudest voice in the room, the title on your business card, or the approval of people who benefit from your silence. Sometimes the bravest thing you will ever do is quietly begin again. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of your own strength or helped you feel a little less alone, I hope you will consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Stories become meaningful when they remind us that someone else has walked a difficult road and still found hope waiting on the other side. The greatest victories are rarely the loudest ones. They are the mornings when peace finally replaces fear, when self-respect becomes stronger than regret, and when home is no longer a place where others decide your worth, but the quiet place inside yourself where you finally remember it. Every autumn, a few maple leaves still fall across my front porch. I sweep them away with the same old broom, carrying no anger toward the season that changed my life. Because sometimes the leaves have to fall before you can finally see how strong the tree has quietly become.